So I just saw the new horror film, It Lives Inside, a film that follows a teenage girl who starts to notice her ex-best friend is looking quite disheveled every time she rocks up at school. She's got her hair all over the place, she's looking like the girl from The Ring, and she's carrying around this jar. What's in the jar, you ask? Well, in the jar is a terrifying invisible monster. Sounds pretty great. At least that's what I thought. And then I saw the film. Unfortunately, I did not personally find this film very good at all. There are some really interesting moments, but they all feel very derivative. For a horror film, it's not scary whatsoever. The core theme of the movie is maybe the most interesting and thought-provoking part of it. All the most interesting parts of this film come from that cultural identity and living in a place that's not your original home country and kind of coming to terms with that. Our lead character is Indian and she's almost ashamed of her culture and she's really trying to hide the fact of where she's from, and there are some really interesting ideas at play. Her relationship with her mum is very, very intense and emotional, but that's kind of where the intrigue stops, and I don't think it fully comes together. Everything that happens feels very obvious and very cliche and generic. You kind of know where it's going at all times. All our characters are Indian, our demon is Indian. It's all about kind of your culture and having to accept where you're from, and there's all this really juicy stuff at play. And yet I feel like the film never really utilizes and hammers home all these really interesting and rich themes properly in a way that made me engaged and by the end felt satisfied. Found this film to be like so close to being something quite interesting, and with the monster itself, this invisible demon creature, I found there to be like an interesting metaphor there, and I could see what they were trying to do. I think that's what the most disappointing thing to me is like on paper, this film I think works, but I think what doesn't work is the execution. All the characters start off in one place and they end up exactly where you think they're gonna end up. It doesn't really do anything interesting or unique, and it doesn't give us enough time to kind of really take all these characters out of being quite one-dimensional. There are a lot of aspects of this girl's experience in this American high school that we don't really see, and we've just got to kind of infer. And I just feel like a story like this really needed more time to breathe. The first time I felt a genuine kind of sense of dread or suspense or terror or horror or any kind of eliciting fear of scares that you kind of want from a horror film were like over an hour into the film. And that's not like this interesting slow burn where we get all this really kind of powerful, interesting character work. It just kind of stumbles along, and then eventually it does get more interesting. But for me personally, I found by the time we got some really amazing practical looking elements and really interesting things, I was just so checked out, and I was kind of just waiting for the film to end. The film is deadly serious. It's way too self-serious. I think it could really use a bit of levity, a bit of fun and humor. And I'm not talking quips and gags and jokes all over the place, but the tone itself is so serious that if you're going down that route, the mood and the atmosphere throughout the whole film needs to be building up with this sense of tension and dread. But the film has no tension, no dread. There's no sense of suspense. It all just kind of is there and it's happening. I feel like the film really feels like it's PG-13. And so then when we get these kills and these moments, it just didn't really pack the punch that you kind of want it to when the film is so deadly serious. And it's such a shame because there's so many interesting sporadic ideas and themes and moments in the film, but it just doesn't come together. And by the end, everything feels a little bit too easy. It just feels so like, yeah, well, we're at that part of the film, so that needs to happen. Has that been earned? Absolutely not. But we've got to get to the third act, and I found that to be a little frustrating and a little kind of annoying just because it's like, I want more from this film because the film has a really great opening premise. Overall, I just found this to be such a missed opportunity, such a disappointing missed opportunity as well, because this is the type of film that I think I should love, but there are so many elements that just do not work for me when I sat down and watched it, and I found the experience to be like, despite all the things it was trying to say and almost saying, it felt like a little hollow, but I do have to be honest, I may just not be the type of demographic that this film is going to speak to. I obviously am not Indian, so I wonder if people, or even just I live in the country I was born in, so I wonder if people who have like moved to a new country and they're trying to fit in at school and they're having this kind of cultural war within themselves, like, and not wanting to be like from wherever they're from, doesn't have to be Indian, can be from anywhere. I do wonder if this film speaks to them more. But I do think, just generally, as a film goer and being able to empathize with whoever I'm watching as our lead character, I do think the film kind of suffers from not making our characters interesting or likable or sympathetic in moments that I feel like they really needed to be. There feels like there's 2 or 3 scenes for every character missing. The film itself visually isn't an interesting film. There's moments with this really intense, overbearing red just lighting over all of it for these unique moments throughout the film, but they almost feel kind of at odds with the rest of the film, which feels very flat, uninteresting. The cinematography is nothing to write home about, which I think for a horror film, you kind of really want there to be some really interesting dynamic lighting and some really interesting cool shots and angles, and you want to see something new and fresh. Whereas everything this film did, and the moments that worked the best, were just super derivative. Like, just every single moment where I went, that was actually not the worst. I then went, and it reminds me of this, and I just went through, like, every other horror film I've ever seen, and I just suddenly realized, I just, like, wasn't as good as them, because I'm still in the cinema thinking about all these other films. It's kind of a shame, because I think this film, and this idea, with this story it's trying to tell, could have been something very, very good. But yeah, unfortunately, just with so many good horror films recently, mostly just Talk to Me. Just go see Talk to Me in the cinema if you're looking for a horror movie in the cinema.